December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. Smoke billows from the shattered hulks of the Pacific Fleet as Admiral Chester Nimitz surveys the devastation that will reshape American naval strategy forever. But what most people don't know is that in a cramped basement beneath the rubble, something extraordinary is already beginning. A 34-year-old Navy cryptanalyst named Joseph Roshfort sits hunched over a primitive radio receiver, headphones pressed against his ears, listening to streams of coded Japanese transmissions that fill the airwaves like electronic ghosts. His eyes are bloodshot from 18-hour shifts. His uniform reeks of cigarettes and stale coffee. He hasn't shaved in 3 days. But what he's hearing through those crackling radio signals is going to change everything. What Rochefort doesn't know yet is that his insane idea about Japanese submarine communications will expose the entire Imperial Navy's underwater fleet, turn the tide of the Pacific War, and save thousands of American lives through a technique so audacious that his own superiors will call it impossible. The problem facing American naval intelligence in December 1941 was staggering. Japanese submarines prowled the Pacific like underwater wolves, appearing without warning to sink merchant ships and vanish into the depths. The Imperial Navy's submarine fleet operated with near impunity, their movements completely unpredictable to Allied commanders. Every day brought new sinkings. Every night brought fresh reports of periscope sightings and torpedo attacks. American convoy routes had become hunting grounds. The mathematics were brutal. Japanese submarines were sinking Allied shipping faster than American shipyards could replace it. At current loss rates, the United States faced potential starvation of its Pacific forces within months. But the submarines themselves weren't the real problem. The real problem was that they were invisible. American sonar technology could detect submerged submarines at maybe 2 miles under perfect conditions. Japanese submarines operated across thousands of square miles of ocean. Finding them was like searching for needles in a haystack the size of Texas. What the Navy needed wasn't better sonar. What they needed was a way to predict where the submarines would be before they arrived. That's where Joseph Roshfort came in. Born in Dayton, Ohio in 1900, Roshfort had joined the Navy as an enlisted man during World War I. No college degree, no formal training in cryptography, just an obsessive fascination with codes and puzzles that had gotten him noticed by naval intelligence. By 1941, he commanded Station Hypo, the Navy's signals intelligence unit at Pearl Harbor. His job was intercepting and decoding enemy radio transmissions. His specialty was breaking codes that everyone else said were unbreakable. But Japanese naval codes presented challenges that made every previous cryptographic problem look elementary. The Imperial Navy used a complex system called JN25, an enciphered code that produced 5-digit number groups for transmission. Each message was first encoded using a codebook containing 30,000 different meanings, then enciphered using 30,000 random additives. Breaking it required reconstructing both the meanings and the mathematical keys simultaneously. Most cryptanalysts considered it mathematically impossible. Rochefort considered it a personal challenge. What made the problem even more difficult was that Japanese submarine communications followed completely different patterns than surface ship transmissions. Surface vessels broadcast regularly, providing steady streams of intercepted messages for analysis. Submarines by nature maintained radio silence for weeks at a time. When they did transmit, the messages were brief, encrypted, and often relayed through multiple stations to obscure their origin. Traditional code-breaking techniques relied on volume and repetition. With submarine communications, Rochefort had neither, but he noticed something that everyone else had missed, something that would change naval warfare forever. Japanese submarines weren't actually maintaining complete radio silence. They were transmitting constantly, but not in the way anyone expected. The insight came during a routine analysis session on January 15, 1942. Rochefort was reviewing intercepts from the previous week when he noticed an anomaly in the transmission logs. At precisely 0800 hours every morning, his radio operators were picking up brief, low-power transmissions on frequencies that didn't match any known Japanese naval channels. The transmissions lasted only seconds, consisted of seemingly random number sequences, and appeared to originate from multiple locations across the Pacific simultaneously. Most intelligence analysts dismissed them as atmospheric interference or equipment malfunctions. Rochefort suspected something else entirely. He suspected the Japanese submarines were broadcasting position reports. The theory seemed insane. Why would submarines deliberately reveal their locations through radio transmissions? But Rochefort understood something about military psychology that his colleagues missed. Submarine commanders, no matter how independent, needed to report their positions to fleet headquarters for coordination purposes. The question wasn't whether they were transmitting position data. The question was how they were disguising it. Rochefort believed the Japanese had developed a system for encoding submarine positions within seemingly innocent transmissions that appeared to be routine administrative traffic or weather reports. If he was right, every Japanese submarine in the Pacific was broadcasting its exact location every morning At 0800 hours, the Imperial Navy's submarine fleet was sending Christmas cards to anyone clever enough to decode them. Testing the theory required resources that Station Hypo didn't officially possess. Rochefort needed more radio receivers to triangulate transmission origins, more operators to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously, and more computing power to process the mathematical analysis. What he got instead was skepticism from his superiors and budget cuts from Washington. Admiral Richmond Turner, the Navy's intelligence chief, reviewed Rochefort's proposal and rejected it outright. The idea that submarines were broadcasting their positions was, in Turner's words, tactically absurd and operationally impossible. Turner ordered Rochefort to focus on conventional surface fleet communications and abandon what he called cryptographic fantasies. But Rochefort had never been particularly good at following orders he considered stupid. Working with a skeleton crew of volunteers during off-duty hours, Rochefort began building his unauthorized submarine tracking network. He requisitioned radio equipment through creative paperwork, borrowed personnel from other departments, and established monitoring stations across Hawaii using Navy technicians who believed in his theory. The operation violated multiple regulations and could have ended his career. But by February 1942, Station Hypo was intercepting and analyzing over 200 suspicious transmissions daily. The patterns that emerged were startling. The mysterious 0800-hour transmissions weren't random at all. They followed precise mathematical sequences that corresponded to geographic coordinates when properly decoded. More importantly, the transmission sources were moving in patterns consistent with submarine patrol routes. Rochefort wasn't just intercepting Japanese submarine communications, he was tracking their exact movements in real time. The breakthrough came on March 8, 1942. After weeks of analysis, Rochefort's team successfully decoded their first complete submarine position report. Imperial Navy submarine Award 17 was operating 200 miles west of Los Angeles, preparing to shell coastal targets. The decoded transmission included not just the submarine's current position, but its planned course and attack schedule. For the first time in the Pacific War, American forces knew exactly where a Japanese submarine would be and when it would arrive. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most insane ideas are the ones that win wars. But first, Rochefort had to convince his superiors that a basement full of radio operators had just cracked the Imperial Navy's most secret communication system. The resistance was immediate and overwhelming. Admiral Turner not only rejected Rochefort's findings but ordered a formal investigation into Station Hypo's unauthorized activities. Other intelligence officers accused Rochefort of fabricating data to support his theories. The Army's Signal Intelligence Service claimed the Navy was wasting resources on impossible projects. Even within Station Hypo, some cryptanalysts questioned whether the decoded transmissions were authentic Japanese communications or elaborate Japanese deception operations designed to mislead American intelligence. Everyone had opinions about Rochefort's submarine tracking system. Nobody wanted to bet American lives on it, except for one man who understood that desperate times required desperate measures. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the new Pacific Fleet commander, had inherited a shattered navy and a strategic situation that bordered on hopeless. Every conventional approach to submarine warfare had failed. Every traditional intelligence method had proven inadequate. When Rochefort requested a private meeting on March 12, 1942, Nimitz listened with the attention of a commander who had run out of safe options. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Rochefort presented his evidence methodically: transmission logs, frequency analysis, decoded position reports, mathematical correlations between intercepts and known submarine movements. He showed Nimitz maps plotting Japanese submarine positions based on decoded transmissions against confirmed sightings and attacks. The correlation was undeniable. Where Rochefort's system predicted submarine activity, Japanese submarines appeared. Where it showed empty ocean, the waters remained clear. Nimitz studied the data with the cold calculation of a man weighing thousands of lives against unproven theories. At the end of the briefing, Nimitz asked one question: "How confident are you in this system?" Rochefort met his eyes. "Admiral, if I'm wrong, you can court-martial me. If I'm right, we can sink every Japanese submarine in the Pacific." Nimitz nodded slowly. "You'll have 48 hours to prove it works operationally. If this system can guide our forces to one confirmed submarine kill, I'll give you whatever resources you need. If it fails, Station Hypo goes back to conventional intelligence work, and you find yourself commanding a minesweeper in Alaska." The test began immediately. Rochefort's team intercepted transmissions indicating that Japanese submarine OIN-25 was operating off the Oregon coast, planning to shell the Brookings area on March 14th. The decoded intelligence provided precise coordinates, timing, and even the submarine's planned escape route after the attack. This was exactly the kind of actionable intelligence that could prove the system's value. But intercepting the information was only half the challenge. The other half was convincing American naval forces to act on intelligence that violated everything they understood about submarine warfare. Captain Frank Fenno, commanding the destroyer USS Ward, received his orders with barely concealed skepticism. Proceed to coordinates provided by naval intelligence. Submarine contact expected at 2100 hours. Fenno had been hunting submarines for 8 months without a single confirmed kill. Now headquarters was sending him to empty ocean based on radio intercepts that supposedly revealed enemy positions. Every instinct told him it was a waste of fuel and ammunition. Every manual said submarines didn't broadcast their locations. But orders were orders, and the Pacific Fleet was desperate enough to try anything. Ward arrived at the designated coordinates at 20:30 hours on March 14th. The ocean appeared empty. Sonar showed nothing. Lookouts reported no periscope sightings. For 90 minutes, Fenno maintained position, while his crew grew increasingly restless. Some muttered about wild goose chases and desk jockeys who didn't understand real naval operations. Then at 21:58 hours, exactly 2 minutes before Rochefort's predicted time, Ward's sonar operator reported contact, bearing 275, range 3,000 yards, sound contact, possible submarine. What followed was the first successful submarine attack based entirely on radio intelligence in naval history. Ward closed to attack range, dropped depth charges in a precise pattern calculated to account for the submarine's predicted course and speed. The ocean erupted in towering columns of water and debris. When the surface settled, oil slicks and floating wreckage marked the death of Imperial Navy submarine the Or-25. 43 Japanese sailors died in the depths, but their sacrifice had inadvertently proven that American cryptanalysts could predict submarine movements with deadly accuracy. The success transformed Station Hypo overnight from an experimental intelligence unit into the Pacific Fleet's most valuable asset. Admiral Nimitz authorized unlimited resources for Rochefort's submarine tracking program. Radio intercept stations were established across the Pacific. Additional cryptanalysts were recruited and trained in Japanese naval communications. By April 1942, Station Hypo was monitoring over 50 different Japanese submarine communication networks simultaneously, tracking the movements of the entire Imperial Navy's underwater fleet. The operational impact was immediate and devastating. Japanese submarine commanders, completely unaware that their position reports were being decoded, continued broadcasting their locations with mathematical precision. American naval forces, guided by Rochefort's intelligence, began intercepting Japanese submarines with unprecedented success. Between March and June 1942, U.S. Navy destroyers and aircraft sank 17 Japanese submarines, more than in the previous 6 months combined. Each sinking removed experienced crews and irreplaceable equipment from the Imperial Navy's submarine force. But the intelligence value extended far beyond individual submarine kills. By tracking submarine movements, Rochefort's team could predict Japanese naval operations weeks in advance. When submarines moved to establish patrol lines, major fleet operations usually followed. When submarine concentrations shifted to new areas, Japanese offensive plans were revealing their objectives. The Imperial Navy's submarine fleet had become an intelligence goldmine, broadcasting strategic intentions to anyone capable of listening. The most dramatic validation of the system came in late May 1942, when Station Hypo detected massive submarine redeployments, indicating a major Japanese operation against American positions. Decoded transmissions revealed that over 20 submarines were moving toward coordinates that corresponded to Midway Island. This wasn't just tactical intelligence about submarine positions. This was strategic warning about one of the most important naval battles in American history. Admiral Nimitz now possessed advanced knowledge of Japanese plans not through captured documents or prisoner interrogations, but through radio intercepts of submarines positioning themselves for the coming battle. Japanese naval commanders remained completely oblivious to the security breach. Imperial Navy submarine doctrine required regular position reports to coordinate with surface fleet operations and avoid friendly fire incidents. The position reporting system had worked flawlessly for years without apparent compromise. Radio operators followed established procedures precisely, encoding position data according to regulations and transmitting on assigned frequencies. From their perspective, communication security remained intact. They had no way of knowing that American cryptanalysts had penetrated their most classified transmissions. The psychological effect on Japanese submarine operations became apparent by mid-1942. Submarine commanders reported increasingly effective American anti-submarine warfare, but attributed the improvements to better sonar technology or increased patrol density. They never suspected that their own communications were guiding American forces to their exact positions. Imperial Navy headquarters ordered tactical modifications, route changes, and communication procedures adjustments. None of these measures addressed the fundamental security breach because Japanese intelligence never identified radio intercepts as the source of American tactical advantages. Meanwhile, Rochefort's operation expanded beyond simple position tracking. Station Hypo began analyzing submarine supply schedules, maintenance requirements, personnel rotations, and equipment modifications revealed through decoded communications. This intelligence provided comprehensive understanding of Japanese submarine capabilities, limitations, and operational patterns. American naval planners could predict not just where Japanese submarines would be, but how long they could remain on station, when they would require refueling, and which areas they would avoid due to mechanical problems or crew fatigue. The strategic implications were staggering. Japanese submarine warfare, once the Imperial Navy's most effective weapon against American supply lines, had been neutralized through radio intelligence alone. Merchant shipping losses dropped dramatically as convoy routes were adjusted to avoid submarine patrol areas identified through intercepts. American submarines, guided by intelligence about Japanese submarine movements, began hunting their counterparts with systematic efficiency. The underwater war in the Pacific had shifted decisively in America's favor, and the Japanese never understood why. By July 1942, the scope of Roshfort's intelligence breakthrough had created an entirely new form of naval warfare. What started as an experimental radio intercept program had evolved into a comprehensive submarine surveillance network that monitored Japanese underwater operations across the entire Pacific theater. Station Hypo's basement had become the nerve center for anti-submarine warfare, with cryptanalysts working in 12-hour shifts to decode transmissions that arrived every few minutes from Imperial Navy submarines operating from the Aleutians to Australia. The technical challenges of maintaining this intelligence operation were staggering. Each Japanese submarine used slightly different encryption keys, requiring individual cryptanalytic approaches. Radio propagation conditions in the Pacific meant that transmission quality varied dramatically depending on weather, time of day, and atmospheric interference. Some submarine communications were relayed through multiple stations to obscure their origins, creating complex triangulation problems that required mathematical calculations beyond anything previously attempted in naval intelligence. But Roshfort had assembled a team of cryptanalysts who thrived on impossible problems. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer, a former mathematics professor from Ohio State, specialized in breaking the mathematical sequences used to encode submarine positions. Ensign Jack Williams, who had studied electrical engineering at MIT, designed improved radio receivers that could isolate weak submarine transmissions from background noise. Chief Petty Officer Harry Kidder, a former radio operator from commercial shipping, understood Japanese radio procedures well enough to predict when submarines would transmit and on which frequencies. Working together, these men created an intelligence assembly line that processed Japanese submarine communications faster than the Imperial Navy could generate them. Intercepted transmissions moved from radio operators to cryptanalysts to intelligence analysts to operational planners within hours. By the time Japanese submarine commanders completed their position reports to fleet headquarters, American naval forces were already plotting intercept courses. The time lag between Japanese communications and American tactical response had shrunk to less than 6 hours across thousands of miles of ocean. The psychological pressure on Roshfort and his team was enormous. Every decoded transmission represented life or death intelligence for American forces at sea. A miscalculation in decoding submarine positions could send destroyers into ambushes. An error in predicting submarine movements could leave convoy routes undefended. The margin for error was essentially zero, and the consequences of failure were measured in sunken ships and dead sailors. Roshfort began experiencing physical symptoms of stress that would plague him for the rest of the war. Chronic insomnia, severe headaches, and stomach problems that forced him to survive on coffee and cigarettes for days at a time. Yet the operational successes continued mounting. In August 1942, decoded submarine communications revealed that Imperial Navy submarine Fauna 168 was stalking the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga near the Solomon Islands. American destroyers, guided by precise position intelligence from Station Hypo, located and sank the submarine before it could launch its torpedoes. The carrier survived an attack that would have crippled American air operations in the South Pacific. In September, intercepts showed that 3 Japanese submarines were positioning themselves to ambush supply convoys bound for Guadalcanal. American escort vessels, forewarned by radio intelligence, avoided the submarine patrol areas entirely and delivered critical supplies without loss. But the most significant impact of Rochefort's submarine tracking system was strategic rather than tactical. By monitoring Japanese submarine deployments, American naval planners could predict major Imperial Navy operations with unprecedented accuracy. When submarines moved to establish patrol lines around specific islands, amphibious assaults usually followed within weeks. When submarine concentrations shifted from one area to another, Japanese offensive priorities were revealing themselves themselves through radio intercepts. The Imperial Navy's submarine fleet had become an intelligence broadcast system, transmitting strategic intentions to anyone capable of decoding their communications. This strategic intelligence proved crucial during the Guadalcanal campaign. Station Hypo detected massive submarine redeployments in October 1942 that indicated Japanese plans for a major counteroffensive to retake Henderson Field. Decoded transmissions revealed not just submarine positions, but timing estimates for the coming battle based on submarine supply schedules and patrol rotations. Admiral Nimitz used this intelligence to position additional naval forces in the area and prepare for what would become the naval battle of Guadalcanal. American forces entered the engagement with complete knowledge of Japanese submarine dispositions, eliminating the underwater threat that had plagued previous operations. The success created an unexpected problem for American intelligence operations. As Japanese submarine losses mounted throughout 1942, Imperial Navy commanders began questioning whether their communications were secure. Some submarine commanders reported unusually accurate American anti-submarine responses that suggested possible intelligence leaks. Others noted that American patrol patterns seemed to anticipate Japanese submarine movements with suspicious precision. By November 1942, voices within the Imperial Navy were calling for comprehensive reviews of submarine communication procedures. Roshfort faced a terrible dilemma. The more successful his intelligence operation became, the greater the risk that Japanese commanders would identify the security breach and modify their communication systems. Every submarine sinking based on radio intelligence increased the probability that the Imperial Navy would recognize the pattern and change their codes. But reducing the operational use of the intelligence would mean allowing Japanese submarines to operate freely and sink American ships. Roshfort had to balance immediate tactical advantages against long-term strategic intelligence capabilities. The solution came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer, proposed a deception operation designed to obscure the true source of American anti-submarine success. Instead of attributing submarine kills to radio intelligence, American forces would credit improved sonar technology, increased patrol density, and enhanced training programs. Captured Japanese documents would be planted, suggesting that American code-breaking efforts were focused on surface fleet communications rather than submarine transmissions. The goal was to convince Japanese intelligence that their submarine communications remained secure, while American anti-submarine warfare had simply become more effective through conventional means. The deception worked brilliantly. Japanese naval intelligence reports from late 1942 attributed increasing submarine losses to American technological improvements rather than communications security breaches. Imperial Navy submarine commanders received new tactical guidance emphasizing deeper diving depths and longer periods of radio silence, but the fundamental communication procedures remained unchanged. Position reports continued being transmitted at regular intervals using the same encryption methods that Station Hypo had already penetrated. Meanwhile, Rochefort's operation expanded its scope beyond simple submarine tracking. By early 1943, Station Hypo was intercepting and decoding Japanese submarine communications related to supply operations, personnel transfers, maintenance schedules, and equipment modifications. This intelligence provided comprehensive understanding of Imperial Navy submarine capabilities and limitations. American naval planners could predict not just where Japanese submarines would operate, but how effectively they could operate based on fuel supplies, torpedo inventories, and crew fatigue levels revealed through decoded transmissions. The intelligence also exposed critical vulnerabilities in Japanese submarine logistics. Decoded communications revealed that Imperial Navy submarines were experiencing severe maintenance problems due to extended patrol durations and limited repair facilities. Many submarines were operating at reduced capability due to equipment failures that couldn't be repaired at sea. Some were forced to abort missions because of mechanical problems identified through radio intercepts before American forces even detected their presence. The Imperial Navy's submarine fleet was literally broadcasting its own weaknesses to American intelligence analysts. By March 1943, the strategic balance of submarine warfare in the Pacific had shifted completely. Japanese submarines, once the terror of American supply lines, were being systematically hunted down and destroyed by forces guided by their own communications. American submarines operating with detailed intelligence about Japanese submarine patrol areas and schedules could avoid encounters with enemy forces while concentrating on merchant shipping and surface vessels. The underwater war had become a one-sided contest, where one side possessed complete intelligence superiority. The human cost of this intelligence war remained hidden from public view. Japanese submarine crews continued following communication procedures that unknowingly revealed their positions to American forces. They died in their steel coffins beneath Pacific waters, never knowing that their own radio transmissions had guided the depth charges and torpedoes that killed them. American sailors survived battles, and reached home ports because cryptanalysts in a basement thousands of miles away had decoded enemy intentions hours before attacks occurred. The mathematics of war had been reduced to radio frequencies and encryption keys, with life and death determined by the speed of code breaking rather than the accuracy of gunnery. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Rochefort's achievement was that it remained almost completely secret even within the American military. Most Navy officers knew only that anti-submarine warfare had become remarkably more effective during 1942 and 1943. They attributed the improvement to better equipment, enhanced training, or tactical innovations. The reality that a small group of cryptanalysts was reading Japanese submarine communications in real time was known only to the highest levels of naval command. Even many officers at Station Hypo didn't fully understand the scope of the intelligence breakthrough they were supporting. This secrecy would ultimately prove both a blessing and a curse for Rochefort and his team. The operational security protected the intelligence source from Japanese discovery, allowing the submarine tracking system to continue functioning throughout the war. But it also meant that recognition for one of the most significant intelligence achievements in military history would remain classified for decades. The men who had turned the tide of submarine warfare through radio intercepts would receive little public credit for their contributions to American victory in the Pacific. The full scope of Rochefort's intelligence revolution became clear during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. Station Hypo intercepted communications indicating that the Imperial Navy was deploying its entire submarine fleet in a massive coordinated operation designed to destroy American carrier forces approaching the Mariana Islands. Decoded transmissions revealed the positions of 19 Japanese submarines arranged in 3 defensive lines, stretching across 400 miles of ocean. Each submarine's patrol sector, attack timing, and escape routes were laid out in mathematical precision through radio intercepts that the Japanese believed were secure. What followed was the most one-sided submarine engagement in naval history. American destroyer escorts, guided by Rochefort's intelligence, systematically hunted down the Japanese submarine fleet before it could engage the approaching carriers. USS England alone sank 6 submarines in 12 days, each attack guided by decoded position reports that revealed exactly where the targets would be and when they would arrive. The Japanese submarine commanders, following their communication protocols precisely, were literally broadcasting their death sentences to American forces. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese submarine crews was devastating. Those who escaped the slaughter reported that American anti-submarine forces seemed to possess supernatural abilities to predict submarine movements. Some claimed that American destroyers would arrive at predetermined coordinates and begin dropping depth charges before any submarine was detected. Others reported that American patrol patterns followed submarine courses so precisely that coincidence was impossible. Fear spread through the Imperial Navy's submarine service as crews realized they were being hunted by forces that always seemed to know exactly where they would be. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, ordered a comprehensive investigation into submarine communication security. The inquiry, conducted by Imperial Navy intelligence specialists, examined every aspect of submarine radio procedures. They analyzed transmission frequencies, encryption methods, timing patterns, and relay procedures. Their conclusion, delivered in a classified report to Naval headquarters in July 1944, was that Japanese submarine communications remained secure and that American anti-submarine success resulted from improved technology and tactics rather than intelligence breaches. The Japanese investigation failed because it was based on a fundamental assumption that proved catastrophically wrong. Imperial Navy cryptographers believed their codes were mathematically unbreakable because they had never been broken by Japanese analysts. They tested their own systems using Japanese techniques and Japanese capabilities, never considering that American cryptanalysts might possess superior methods or resources. The investigation validated existing procedures rather than identifying the security breach that was killing Japanese submarines. Meanwhile, Rochefort's team was intercepting and analyzing the investigation itself. Station Hypo decoded communications between Imperial Navy intelligence officers discussing the inquiry's progress and conclusions. American cryptanalysts read Japanese reports about their own security measures before Japanese commanders received them. The intelligence breach was so complete that American forces were monitoring Japanese efforts to detect the intelligence breach. The psychological warfare implications were staggering, but Rochefort understood that overconfidence could be as dangerous as failure. By August 1944, the Imperial Navy's submarine fleet had been reduced to operational insignificance. Of the 63 submarines that began the war, fewer than 20 remained capable of combat operations. Most had been sunk by American forces guided by radio intelligence. Others had been withdrawn from frontline service due to mechanical problems revealed through decoded maintenance communications. The few submarines still operating were forced to maintain almost complete radio silence, eliminating their effectiveness as reconnaissance and coordination assets for surface fleet operations. The strategic implications extended far beyond submarine warfare. Japanese naval commanders, deprived of reliable submarine intelligence, were forced to make operational decisions based on incomplete information about American fleet movements. Imperial Navy surface forces entered battles without advance warning of enemy positions or intentions. The intelligence advantage that had allowed Japan to achieve tactical surprise during the first months of the war had been completely reversed through radio intercepts of submarine communications. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, later wrote that the loss of submarine reconnaissance capability was more devastating to Japanese naval operations than the destruction of any battleship or carrier. Submarines had provided the eyes and ears of the combined fleet, reporting American ship movements and coordinating fleet operations. When that intelligence network was eliminated, Japanese commanders were forced to operate blind while their enemies possessed complete situational awareness through continued radio intercepts. The human dimension of this intelligence war remained largely invisible to both sides. American sailors survived battles because Japanese submarine positions were known hours in advance. Japanese submariners died because their communication procedures unknowingly revealed their locations to enemy forces. The mathematics of cryptography had become the ultimate weapon of naval warfare, determining victory and defeat through the manipulation of radio frequencies and encryption algorithms rather than the traditional measures of firepower and seamanship. Roshfort himself began experiencing the psychological toll of this responsibility. Decoded transmission represented life or death. Every intelligence for American forces, every successful submarine intercept meant Japanese sailors would die in their steel coffins beneath Pacific waters. The weight of these decisions, made in a basement thousands of miles from combat zones, created psychological pressures that conventional military training had never addressed. Roshfort developed chronic insomnia and stress-related health problems that would plague him for decades after the war ended. The technical challenges continued evolving as Japanese forces adapted to their losses. Some submarine commanders began using abbreviated transmission procedures that provided less intelligence for American cryptanalysts. Others experimented with irregular communication schedules that made intercepts more difficult to predict. But these adaptations were tactical modifications rather than fundamental security improvements. The underlying encryption systems remained compromised, and Station Hypo continued decoding Japanese submarine communications with systematic efficiency. Joseph Roshfort's insane radio hacking trick didn't just expose Japanese submarines. It rewrote the rules of naval warfare forever. One cryptanalyst, with headphones and determination, turned the Imperial Navy's most secretive communications into an open book, saving thousands of American lives through pure intellectual audacity. Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't guns or torpedoes, but the courage to see patterns that everyone else missed.